Hey, check, check. Good morning, good morning. Hey, hey. 1, 2.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us at GCAP 2022, where we know that this year's focus is on ambition. I'll start off with an apology. We did have a welcome to country organised, but unfortunately there's illness and he's unable to attend. So instead, I'd like to acknowledge that we are meeting here on the land of the Wurundjeri people, and on behalf of all of us, I'd like to pay respect to elders past, present and emerging. And I'd like to acknowledge that we celebrate the storytelling, the creativity, the beliefs and the relationship with land of the world's oldest living culture, and extend that respect to all other First Nation people who may be joining us today. We recognise that the sovereignty was never ceded and it will always be Aboriginal land. So good morning, my name's Ron Curry, I'm the CEO of IGEA, the organisers of the event today. And it's really exciting to be here after 2 years' absence, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a little while. But what I'd like to do is welcome to the stage the Honourable Steve Dimopoulos, the Minister for Tourism, Sports and Major Events, and the Minister for Creative Industries, who's going to officially open today's event. Thanks, Steve.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Ron. Also, I'd like to acknowledge, obviously, IGEA, very important part of the industry. So Ron is the CEO, Raylene, COO. Caroline Pitcher, CEO of Vic Screen. Vic Screen is our agency that supports not just film, but increasingly games. And we've got a international guests, including Zalavia Nelson Jr. from Studio Head, and Osama Darius, lead content designer of Unannounced. And all the other guest speakers, I think there's a couple in the front row here who are going to speak to you with much more authority than I will about this amazing and exciting industry. So welcome to Games Connect Asia Pacific 2022. I hear it's the biggest sellout crowd of the any of the conferences so far, any GCAP conferences so far. It's great to be back in person. And for those who are visiting from outside of Victoria, can I just suggest that you take every opportunity when you get time after the conference to visit everything that is amazing about Melbourne and Victoria, including right here. We've got the Van Gogh exhibition, we've got the Picasso Century at the National Gallery of Victoria, we've got the Fringe Festival starting later this week, so there's heaps to do and heaps of food and drink as well. So this is the Games capital of Australia. We have about 60% of the Games workforce right here, and it's become a hub in Australia for games, and there'll be a lot more to come. Our government, the Victorian government, the Andrews Labor government, will continue to support the games industry. Just last Friday, New Zealand's A44 announced they were setting up their Australian headquarters right here in Melbourne. And that's very exciting for us, but there'll be, as I said, some more announcements coming in the next few weeks. The Victorian game sector has been defined by the theme for what this year's GCAP is, which is ambition. Ambition is one of those concepts that can sit a bit awkwardly in the Australian psyche, like self-praise or sitting in the back of a taxi. It's not the kind of thing that Aussies do. But many Australians are familiar with a concept called the tall poppy syndrome. The idea that being ambitious sits at odds with a group dynamic, that success might invite derision. I think that's nonsense. One thing that has struck me about your industry, the games industry, is not so much that you reject the tall poppy syndrome, but that you're oblivious to it. And it's a wonderful thing. You're relentlessly overachieving, growing and dreaming, and using your imagination in the most fascinating ways, and working hard. That's what we should all be doing. As a minister in the Victorian government, that's our ambition as a government. We're defined by our approach to be bold and ambitious, to do things better across every area of society. So this year's theme, GCAP's theme, is reflective of an industry that has grown so much since the last GCAP was held right here in 2019 at the Melbourne Convention and Exhibition Centre. I read an incredible stat that the game sector worldwide is bigger than the film and TV industries put together. I applaud IGEA for taking a post-COVID snapshot of the industry and preparing an ambitious schedule for you all. Over the next 3 days, you'll hear from amazing leaders in the field. You'll take part in hopefully thought-provoking, creative and innovative discussions and sessions. You'll meet each other. Hopefully you'll have business transactions, networks, and you'll learn some things. One of the biggest success stories from the Victorian games industry this year has been the global hit, Cult of the Lamb. Proof of what can happen when you marry ambition, a great idea, and a lot of hard work. For the Victorians here today, be assured that our government knows the worth and the value of your industry, not only economically, and its increasing economic value, but the joy, the inspiration and the entertainment you bring to millions of people, both here and around the world. So we're committed as a government to supporting the game sector through Vic Screen and through other ways. We're committed to supporting GCAP every year, and we have this year as well, and of course, Melbourne International Games Week. So before I conclude, I just wanted to acknowledge in the reverse order the traditional owners of the land upon which we meet and pay my respects to the elders past and present. Ron was spot on when he said there were thousands and thousands of years of storytelling on this land before British settlement. And part of what is attractive about games is that you tell a story, but the actual person who plays a game gets to help write that story. So I wanted to acknowledge traditional owners, but also wanted to acknowledge you for coming to Victoria, for connecting with each other. We hope you have an enjoyable, inspiring stay. For those who are Victorians, we hope you get as much out of it as the visitors from overseas. I look forward to the great ideas that come out. I'll be with you on a couple of other occasions this week. So I now formally declare GCAP 2022 open. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Minister. And just, I guess, riffing off a little bit of what the Minister said, you know, Melbourne and Victoria have traditionally and arguably been the most ambitious place to make games in Australia. And we look forward to that continuing. And we also look forward to the increasing competition from the other states. And over the next 3 days, I think each of you will see that all of the states are here in force as screen agencies. So please make sure you take the opportunity, if you're from a particular state, to speak to those people who are here, including Screen Australia, who have a room upstairs. When IGEA took over stewardship of GCAP, we were incredibly excited. Because we love this. We love GCAP, we love Melbourne International Games Week, and it was our favourite week of the year. But we took it over and we were excited to get everybody together, and then COVID hit. So for the last 2 years, as we all know, we've had a virtual GCAP. So we're incredibly excited that we're all here today in person. And I think that's what we've all missed, is that connection. Like the Minister also said, we far exceeded the numbers we expected to turn up to GCAP this year. So we're so incredibly privileged to know that so many people want to come and join in and see what, I guess, the IGEA team brings to GCAP. The team has been really ambitious, and I think it's right to say that, you know, ambition isn't a bad thing. It's a good thing. We can work around, and again, the Minister said, this industry tends to be a bit oblivious about the tall poppy syndrome. And those who have succeeded in the industry always seem to reach back and help those who are coming up. And the thing, I guess, we all love about the industry is how collaborative it is. We couldn't do today without our sponsors, and we know we've had a number of them on the board there, but what I would like to do is just go through and mention each of the sponsors who make it possible for these events to come together. It's one thing for us all to, you know, want to have a nice meal and look at the booths and stuff, but it's not without the sponsors coming together and being incredibly generous, both with their time and their funds. So I'd like to thank Unreal Engine Epic Games, Sledgehammer, EA Monkeys, Creative Victoria, Hipster Whale, Amazon Web Services, League of Geeks, Playside Studios, Vic Screen, Big Ant Studios, Screen Australia, Procreate, Space Draft, Keyword Studios, Blowfish, Cam Rogers Legal, Gameloft, LGB, Screen New South Wales, Screen Queensland, Screen West, and the South Australian Film Corporation. So please, if you see these people around, either on their booths or their stands, don't forget to say thanks and acknowledge their contribution to this week. But the biggest contribution to these next 3 days will be the people who are here, and you will make the difference whether this is a good conference, a great conference. So what I invite you all to do is enjoy, learn, collaborate, and network. If this is your first GCAP, please go and introduce yourself to somebody, or more than one person. If you've been here before and you're an old hand, if you see somebody standing by themselves at a break or lunch or just in the corridor, go say hello, shake their hands, introduce themselves. It's amazing what sort of serendipity comes from people meeting each other at an event like this. So I won't go on too much longer. The one great thing, the best thing I think that came out of our virtual GCAPs in the last 2 years was Sav's TV housekeeping video. And I'm sure that's the thing that's had the most hits on YouTube. So we were going to do a video, but we thought seeing Sav's here, we may as well ask him to come up and do his own housekeeping. So over to you, Sav.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you, Ron, for that introduction. I am sorry, I am not in my kitchen today. If you have attended the past 2 digital GCAPs, you'll probably be surprised to see that I do exist outside of my house. If you haven't attended the past 2 GCAPs, I would like to introduce myself. I am Sav Wolf. I'm the Manager of Events, Content, Diversity, Equality and Inclusion for IGEA. I am also one of the event coordinators and content manager for GCAP. This is actually the 4th GCAP I've run. I was working on GCAP before we got merged with IGEA, so they have to put up with me now. I came with the conference, unfortunately. I was very surprised by the time I got to my 4th GCAP that it was a 50-50 ratio of in-person and digital, but I can say now that I have seen the best of both worlds. This year's GCAP, as mentioned, is absolutely one of the busiest that we've had. We have crammed amazing talks into pretty much every room we can. We've got phenomenal sponsor booths for you to visit and enjoy. And of course, we have free coffee at our coffee cart, the important one for almost everybody in the room. This year, we've also got some great new features as well. We have a local lounge, which contains amazing micro talks, game demos, and very, very comfortable bean bags. We also have Meet to Match back again with a dedicated area for your meetings as well. I would just like to apologise as well. We did have a Welcome to Country planned, but unfortunately our elder became sick last night, so was unable to attend. While we're here, and because I haven't done an in-person Melbourne International Games Week in so long, I'm going to have a little chat with you about housekeeping today. So to cover off some important points first, in the case of any emergency, please notify an IGEA team member immediately, be that a medical, fire, or other, and we will escalate. In the event of an emergency, one of two alarms will sound. If it's just a beep, like your alarm clock, that's an alert, so please remain calm and await further instructions. If it's a whoop whoop, like a juggalo, that's the sign to evacuate immediately. MCEC wardens will direct you to the safest evacuation point and let you know when it's safe to turn. Also, a big shout out to Raylene for approving my juggalo joke at a professional conference. Never thought I'd do that one. If in an emergency an IGEA team member is not available immediately, please contact one of our many volunteers. You'll already have met a bunch. They're wandering around in our blue shirts with the GCAP logo on the front. We are also seeing each other for the first time in a long time, and if you're like me, you've forgotten social skills. So let's cover off some expected behaviour. There is a new world to navigate of masks and social distancing at conferences. We have provided you all masks and sanitizers free of charge and can replace them if you need at the Rego desk. IGEA strongly recommends the use of masks when you cannot socially distance. We like to treat it as a common courtesy for people. So if you're approaching a group of people or a new person to talk with, it'd be great if you could check in like, hey, I'm Sav. Would you be more comfortable if I wore my mask for this? We all want to keep each other safe, so if you would all feel sick over the course of the event and can therefore no longer attend, please contact the IGEA team to organise a refund to ensure that you won't be missing out. Please be considerate of your fellow attendees, and let's work to be as safe as we can this Melbourne International Games Week, because I'm sure we'd all like to get to Sunday without getting sick. Also, when you signed up via Eventbrite, you agreed to our privacy policy and code of conduct. This year, I didn't want to allow you to skip over it like a terms and conditions page, so I've actually printed it onto the back of your passes this year, so you can't get rid of me. This also includes a helpful QR code to help you go to the full code of conduct on our website. And who was expecting QR codes to come back, hey? In case you want to start reading it while I'm talking, I can summarize some important points for you because it is a requirement of entry that you abide by our code of conduct. GCAP is a business-to-business developers conference, which means we are expecting you to act as if you're at work in a business. And I know it's been a while since we've all been together like this, but it is absolutely no excuse for unacceptable behaviour. You can probably guess what unacceptable behaviour is, but just in case, this includes physical, written, or other abuse, including intimidation, threats, annoyance, and stalking, any boisterous, lewd, or offensive behaviour or language, continued disturbances and disruptions in person and digital spaces, the use of physical force, any behaviours which create apprehension in another person, possession of any item that can be used as a weapon which may cause danger to others, failure to obey any rules or regulations of any venues, including our digital spaces, or sending sexually explicit messages or images via direct message. All of these will be taken extremely seriously, be they against other attendees, organisers, speakers, or moderators. It will result in immediate action that the IGEA team deem appropriate, including, but not limited to, expulsion from the conference without warning or refund. Basically, if you have to question whether something you're about to do could be considered unacceptable behaviour, don't do it. We've got a zero tolerance policy, and safety is always our highest priority. If you are witness to a code of conduct violation, myself and Raylene Knowles are the main points of contact. If you witness any or a dangerous situation or a person in distress, you can tell either Raylene or myself via our numbers on the website, sorry, I hiccuped, contact a volunteer to come get us, or grab us directly if we're within eyesight. Whatever method you are most comfortable with, and we'll be along to address it ASAP. Please know that anything conveyed to us will be treated in the strictest of confidence, and we are here for support and guidance as you require, if you require. Your safety and comfort within our event is one of our top priorities, and we will work to make sure that we can resolve the issue in a timely manner for you. If you do have any questions, Raylene, myself, and the IGEA team will be floating around during the conference. So please feel free to get in contact if you need us for any reason at all. I'm pretty easy to spot. Welcome back to GCAP. Thank you for listening to me on this, and I would now like to introduce our opening keynotes. Ambition is a complex force that drives us to greatness but can also cause harm. Wren, Brier, and Tim Dawson share lessons in ambition that they learned throughout their careers and how those lessons led them to create their award-winning game, Unpacking. Follow along on their quest to fulfill their ambitions while trying not to be consumed by them. Please welcome Wren and Tim to the stage.
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
We're just going to pour ourselves some water. You can do that, I'll start. Hi, everyone. So this year's theme is ambition, as was mentioned already. It's a pretty interesting concept if you think about it. Without ambition, none of us would be here today or making the things we make. It's an essential component of the creative process, particularly in an industry as innovation-driven as video games.
But at the same time, if you start telling someone about your new project, and the main response you keep getting is, wow, that sounds really ambitious. We all understand that's not a compliment, right? Like, ambition is this double-edged sword. It's capable of carrying us to dizzying heights, but also bringing us crashing down.
My name is Wren Brier,
I'm Tim Dawson.
and last year we released a game called Unpacking, which presumably is why we're here giving this keynote. But Unpacking didn't come out of nowhere, so we wanted to talk about how our ambitions carried us to this point and some of the lessons we learned along the way.
We're each going to share some stories from our career before we worked together that shaped us as creators, and how they influenced the development of Unpacking, and where we think our ambitions might take us next.
Lesson 1, ambition is transferable. So I had always wanted to be an artist since as far back as I can remember. I loved to draw ever since I could hold a pencil. I took ceramics classes for 6 years, starting at age 6. I took painting classes after school. I even learned to make stained glass. Anything visual arts was my jam. When I was 13, I watched Lilo and Stitch and was so inspired, I decided right then and there the kind of artist I specifically wanted to be was an animator, preferably at Disney, preferably doing 2D animation. Never mind that Disney stopped making 2D films a couple of years later. Surely they'd come back, right? No one around me took this ambition seriously, but I sure did. That was the age I started drawing digitally and started to treat art as not just a hobby, but as my future career. And yeah, I see you all admiring my drawing from age 13, the oldest surviving digital piece I could find from that time. I know it's beautiful. Any Neopets fans in the crowd? Woo! By the time I graduated from high school, my skills had improved by leaps and bounds. And look, I'm not saying they were amazing, but they were certainly better. And I was ready to do what I'd always dreamt of, going to art school and getting a degree in animation. It wasn't simple. I lived in Israel, and at the time there wasn't even an animation degree available in the country, so I would have to study overseas. Through a complicated series of events, the uni I ended up attending was Quantum College, now SAE, in Brisbane, Australia. It wasn't exactly what I had wanted. I would have preferred a course focused on 2D animation for film and television, while Quantum was very games-focused. But I had always loved games, so the courses on game design and level design and 3D modeling were really interesting to me anyway. But still, I stubbornly animated only in 2D whenever I could, and I even chose to do a solo short film as my final project rather than a game project with a group. But during that final project, I realized I actually didn't really enjoy animating for film all that much. It was way too repetitive for me. I found I preferred the variety working on a game project offered. By the time I graduated from my degree, my ambition had changed. I now wanted to work in games. I felt almost guilty. I had always been so decisive and stubborn about my goal. To suddenly change it felt like admitting failure. I worried that maybe the real reason my goal had changed was because it wasn't realistic to begin with, and there was no real path from being a mid-tier 2D animator at a tiny college in Brisbane, Australia, to working at Disney. But I hadn't failed. Yes, maybe my original goal was a bit too lofty, but it had gotten me really far. I moved to a whole new country. I completed a degree in animation. My skills were better than ever, and they were suited to my new goal. There was no shame in pivoting. I still got to keep my momentum. I transferred the ambition that had gotten me this far into finding work in games in Brisbane. It took a while, but eventually I got my first games job at Half-Brick Studios, getting to work on amazing IPs like Fruit Ninja and Jetpack Joyride.
All right. So yeah, my first lesson, ambition should be achievable. So back when I was in high school, and this is like 1998, a friend and I, we stumbled on this ambitious MMO attempt that was being made by a small team online. There wasn't much to it at the time, other than a lot of big promises and some fairly barren screenshots of 3D terrain. But it was very exciting in that they're going to fix all the things that we don't like about Ultima Online or EverQuest kind of way that appeals strongly to impressionable gamers. We happily joined this active community, and when they put a call out for volunteers to help with the art, I was quick to raise my hand. There we go. Now, the fact that they welcomed a teenager who was teaching himself 3D was perhaps a red flag. But I was just excited to be modeling low-poly monsters and helping out with the community. It was one of my earliest experiences feeling like staff. I modeled those characters. They're like... The other weird thing was they didn't actually I just kind of modeled what I wanted, and they were like, yeah, we'll put this in the game. That was probably also a bad sign. As you can imagine, this project was a little bit too big. Our progress was slow and not really delivering for the fans. I had a really good vantage point to watch the community churn. New fans would arrive. They'd be full of hype and excited for whatever they'd chosen to project onto this game. They gradually grew disillusioned with the lack of progress, and some eventually turned bitter and hostile, which would result in them being ejected from the community by the fresh-faced enthusiastic types that had arrived in the meantime. So I loved what the game was promising, and I loved the community that had shown up to support that, but I hated the perpetual disappointment. It felt like anything good and positive was being borrowed from a future that was never going to pay it back. And this weighed on me heavily when I started to get serious about my own project. A cel-shaded 3D television series starring a group of baby dragons I'd just drawn. Now, did I mention I was still a teenager at this point? But look, I was pretty serious. Look, there's storyboards. That's how they make TV shows. So anyway, I was convinced I was going to make my television show. But this MMO experience had given me pause and made me think maybe I should test the waters a little before I started ramping up the hype. I decided I could make a comic strip, like they have in the newspapers, but mine would be posted online. And this was an original thing I had invented just before stumbling onto the blossoming and very active webcomic community. Anyway, my thinking was that instead of trying to do something massive and failing, every comic strip I did would be a finished product, so that when I inevitably stopped, I wouldn't have failed. I would have just succeeded again and again up until that point. At this point, some of you may have noticed that this comic is lettered entirely in Comic Sans. First of all, I was a teenager. Second of all, it has comic right there in the name. Obviously, it must be appropriate for this kind of thing. Leave me alone. Anyway, I never made the television show, Although if anyone from Netflix is in the audience, hit me up and meet to match. But the comic never got that successful. But I ran the webcomic for over 5 years, like 5 years of continuous daily updates, published over 2,000 comic strips, and maintained a thriving forum and IRC community.
Ambition is believing in yourself. About a year into my first full-time job as a games artist, the studio I was at announced we'd be doing a company-wide prototyping event. Anyone in the studio could pitch a game idea, get a team together, and prototype a game over the course of 5 days. At first, I planned to just watch everyone's pitches and join someone else's team. I wasn't an ideas person, I was just an artist. What did I know about leading a game team? But the day before the pitches were due to happen, inspiration struck, and I suddenly had an idea for a game. Whoops, sorry, wrong button. It was all about baby dragons. Oh, I'm sorry. In this game, you would control unevenly shaped rocks with googly eyes, rolling and hopping into position to create a wall in order to protect your precious diamond queen from an attack. It was called Rocky Defense. I told a couple of friends at the studio about the idea, and they loved it. They helped me workshop the pitch, and I planned to stay back after work that day to make an illustrated slide deck with these quality illustrations you see right here. I excitedly mentioned this over Messenger to another friend of mine. Even just working on a pitch felt thrilling, and I wanted to share my excitement. But I was surprised when this friend told me I shouldn't do it. That pitching was a bad idea, that it would stress me out, that I'm setting myself up to fail, that my hastily put together pitch wouldn't be good, and I wouldn't be able to get a team together and would be hurt by the whole experience. I tried to explain that I felt really good about my pitch, that pretty much everyone was just hastily slapping something together and it wasn't that serious, and that it wasn't even about successfully getting a team together. It was something I wanted to try because it seemed like it would be fun and a valuable thing for me to do. Nothing I said convinced them. They said they'd save their I told you so's for later. But having ambition is believing in yourself. I ignored my friends' warnings and pitched anyway. It went really well. I was very nervous, but people loved the idea, laughed at all the right parts, and cheered and clapped when I finished. Not only did I manage to get a team together, I actually had to turn people down because there weren't enough spots on the team for everyone interested. The game never went any further than the prototype stage, but I had been right. It was a good pitch, and pitching was a great experience. So was leading a team. I was right to believe in myself. I wonder where I'd be now if I had listened to this friend and decided that pitching games was something I just couldn't do. It took me a couple more years to realize I shouldn't keep friends who don't believe in me and try to talk me out of my ambitions.
Ambition cannot live in a box. So I got my first proper games job in 2004, joining Ratbag Games as a junior animator on their cinematics team. I was excited to be part of games and strived to learn the ropes and found myself pretty quickly drawn towards gameplay animation, as I liked the kind of challenges that it had. I soon found myself talking with designers and programmers to be more directly involved in the development. I volunteered to animate previs of game design ideas so they could be better pitched to the rest of the team, and took responsibility for seeing some of these, the animation stuff getting implemented correctly in game. At a different studio, I saw my animation team struggling with repetitive tasks, so I started teaching myself Mel scripting to automate tedious workflows for myself and the other animators. At the next studio I worked at, I pitched a personal prototype I'd been working on as a possible studio side project. And when I was working at Sega, I teamed up with a designer, Sanatan Mishra, to build, among other things, a prototype that would form the foundation for the studio's remake of the Mega Drive classic Castle of Illusion starring Mickey Mouse. We also made one for Golden Axe, which weirdly enough resurfaced many years later. The Steam release didn't mention my name, but it ended up getting out there anyway. The point was, in many ways, I had probably appeared to be an ideal employee. I was obsessed with games, hardworking, fiercely passionate, effortlessly exploitable. But this was all fueled by a growing frustration. The reason I thought to leave my lane and start talking with those designers directly is that the previous game I'd worked on at Ratbag had struggled and then been cancelled by the publisher. Suddenly, it felt like it wasn't enough to do my job and trust in the process. I scripted those tools because at that studio, things seemed so dysfunctional that I could tell no one else was going to help us. When I started making those prototypes at Sega, it was because I thought the studio's methodology was wrong, and in my supreme arrogance, I figured I could do better. You see, my ambition this whole time had been to make great games, and the studios I'd worked at and the people in charge had been failing me. I thought I could change things from below. I thought if I just tried hard enough, mutual self-interest would get me what I wanted, to be exploited effectively. But I couldn't even get that. Resigning from a project that I'd helped start was hard. Starting a 3-person indie studio to develop games on our own was harder still. But it had come to feel like this inevitability. My ambition would no longer accept anything else.
Ambition needs nurturing. Sometime early in my career, I worked at a studio where I had hoped to stay for a very long time. I liked the work, I liked the people, and I thought I could one day become an art director or lead a team. I worked hard. I was doing work well beyond my position, but I was not being promoted from junior to even mid-level artist, despite pushing for it, and despite having my direct manager's support. Upper management pushed back that I didn't meet a couple of their criteria for the promotion. But those criteria were ones that were impossible for me to meet, as they required experience in things my team wasn't doing. I asked if I could move teams so that I could gain that experience. They said no. Maybe a month after my promotion was turned down, my friend in another department got a promotion from mid-level to senior, despite having only a little bit more experience than me. The promotion came as a surprise to him. He hadn't even asked for it. And the strict rules that had applied in my case, for some reason, didn't apply to him. I wondered why. Then I looked around and realized there wasn't a single woman in the company that had started there as a junior and rose to a mid-level position, let alone senior. I realized I couldn't see a future for myself there, and I had to leave. Later in my career, I worked at another company, Well-Placed Cactus, where I felt for the first time what it's like to have my ambition nurtured. When my art direction for the game we were working on started to veer into game design territory, the designer was excited and we worked together on it. When I heard the company was looking for a new producer, I mentioned I had an interest in production, and they put me in charge of a new project and taught me everything I needed to know. I was also paid well. I felt valued and learned things that later came in very handy when I went indie. I would have been a lot less prepared and confident if it weren't for this job. Ambition can't grow in poison. It requires care and fertile soil.
Ambition consumes. When you're young, creative energy might feel inexhaustible. Like the more you draw from it, the more it flows. Like you're building a muscle. But we're not inexhaustible. I had begun to understand the value I was creating for others wasn't actually creating a space for myself, which led me to take the leap of faith into being an indie developer. I'd worked ridiculously hard for others. Now it was time to work ridiculously hard for myself. And yes, that's me destroying an AT field, so. Except my arm hurt. Maybe it was years of mistreatment catching up. Maybe it was the recent intense overtime. But I had shooting pains down the tendons of my dominant arm. I tried switching to using the mouse in my left hand and taking more breaks to see if it would recover, but it didn't. I remember getting to the point where I couldn't hold a shopping bag. I was in my early 30s, and I felt like I could see my ability to create slipping away from me, just as I'd resolved to harness it for myself. And it was an absolutely terrifying thing to look down the barrel of. I didn't know what to do. I was lucky, though, that my injury did respond to physio. And despite being shaken, I was still able to pursue my indie developer dream, starting with a twin-stick shooter about an android called Cactus. Weirdly enough, completely unrelated to the well-placed cactus Wren worked out, just to clear that up in case anyone's getting mixed up. There's a lot of cactuses in Queensland. You can wear a lot of hats as an indie, and as an artist, animator, programmer, writer, designer, and our social media manager, I shouldered what I could to ensure our 3-person studio shipped our first game with the indomitable will I'd honed doing that daily webcomic for 5 years, and the skills I'd sharpened doing extracurricular prototypes. But it wrung me out. Turns out it wasn't just the flesh I had to worry about, it was the spirit too. Seeing Assault Android Cactus through to completion had taken everything I had. I felt scooped out, like a strong breeze would have blown me down and I wouldn't have had the strength to climb back up again. What we're trying to get at with this is that, with these stories, is that ambition manifests itself in many different ways. Sometimes it's something you're trying to protect and grow. Sometimes it's something gnawing at you until you respond. What matters is recognizing it and deciding what you do with it.
My ambition was to make games I cared about with a supportive team, to work across disciplines to create something cohesive, and to be able to reach a wide audience.
My ambition was to make stuff I could feel proud of, but along the way I'd picked up some prerequisites. I hadn't aspired to be in charge of things, but instead accepted that increasing responsibility was just the trade-off for having creative autonomy.
And this is roughly when we met. That wasn't scripted. Sorry.
Embarrassing Wren on stage.
In early 2018, Tim and I had been dating for a year and a half, and we were planning to move in together. Tim had shipped Assault Android Cactus on 3 platforms and was eyeing up a Switch release as a final Hail Mary shot at indie glory.
Wren's job had recently evaporated when the company she was working at was acquired, and she decided to take a few months off before diving back into freelance work.
Meanwhile, Witchbeam was evaluating various prototypes to determine its next game project, none of which involved items and boxes. One day in February, Tim arrived at my apartment with a pile of boxes, and we began to unpack. You may have heard this bit before. I noticed there was a game-like quality to the activity, a combination of matching items into sets, unlocking boxes by clearing the boxes above them, and Tetrising belongings into cupboards and drawers. We also realized that you could tell a lot about a person from the items that they owned. String a series of moves together, and you could even tell a narrative. We continued to mull this idea over for fun until we heard that Stugan had opened up for submissions for that year. Stugan is a games accelerator program in Sweden where every year 15 teams of 1 to 3 people each go live in a cabin in the woods to work on their dream game for 2 months. We had both heard about the program before this and had been intrigued. But this was the first time we were both in a position to take a couple of months off to head to Sweden, and better yet, we had a good idea for a pitch. Having a goal and a deadline suddenly made it all a bit more real, and Tim and I began to prototype the game in earnest. We gave it the working title, Unpacking. We knew we'd have to come up with a real name later. I didn't think we'd get in, but I also knew that if we didn't apply, we definitely wouldn't. Sometimes you just need enough ambition to put your hand up.
At this stage, our ambition for the game was quite modest. Whether it got into Stugan or not, we figured it would just be our little side project that we would tinker with while we were working at our separate jobs.
I saw this game as an opportunity to really indulge myself. In my freelance work, I had to work fast and efficiently and take few risks. But in this side project, I wanted to do the opposite. I would take my time on little details, learn new things, and if I wanted to spend an entire day texturing a sink, I damn well would.
So for Wren, this project was a chance to flex her pixel art skills. But for me, it was a chance to explore programming challenges unrelated to keeping 3D characters all shooting bullets at each other and screaming along at 60 frames per second. I was actually pretty hyped for this change of pace. When we pitched our game to Stugan, we were asked to give a goal for what we thought we would achieve in the 2 months that we would be there in the program. With 7 stages planned for our full game, and the majority of them featuring multiple rooms, we thought getting about half the game to first pass seemed something we could do within that 2 months. The bad news was, we were totally wrong about that. But the good news was, we got a chance to find that out because we got into Stugan. So we flew to Sweden, met talented people from all over the world, had an amazing time, and spent 2 months building a single room. We took our original kitchen level and ended up just polishing it to vertical slice quality, digging deeply into many systems and solving problems we hadn't realized existed. But taking 2 months to make just one room felt like less of a failure of scheduling and more like we had correctly recognized that we had a lot to learn about our own game. What on the surface had felt like something light and diversionary was actually densely packed with potential. People were invested in placing items in positions that meant something to them, and they were already teasing meaning out of our fairly utilitarian items in our kitchen demo, which boded really well for our ambitions of telling story through this gameplay.
But too quickly, Stugan was over. I dreaded going back home, as I had really enjoyed game dev summer camp and knew that returning to Australia meant putting Unpacking on the back burner indefinitely and getting back into freelance work. We landed back in Brisbane in the middle of August, and over the course of the next 2 weeks, everything changed. 2 days after we got back, still extremely jet-lagged, we showed Unpacking at Go423, our local yearly games exhibit. Caitlin Boucher from Screen Queensland played the game there and told us we should apply for funding. The deadline was only 10 days away, but we decided to go for it, and I spent a week working full-time on the application. 3 days after the show, Tim and I posted our very first tweet on the Unpacking Twitter account. It was a sped-up GIF of our kitchen level being unpacked. We had previously posted work-in-progress content of the game to our personal accounts, but the reaction to this GIF was far beyond anything we had experienced up until then. In 2 days, the account went from 2 followers, me and Tim, to over 7,000. The GIF had over 10,000 likes and thousands of retweets. Someone reposted it to GiphyCat and shared it on Reddit, where it was viewed over 100,000 times and ended up on the front page of Reddit Gaming. Like, what? In less than a day, publishers started to get in touch with us on Twitter. It was incredible and overwhelming. By the end of the month, we submitted our funding application to Screen Queensland. Jeff Van Dyke had joined us as our audio director, and Tim's company Witchbeam picked Unpacking as its next project and hired me.
With a Screen Queensland grant and a third team member, we were ready to put together our pitch deck and start chatting with publishers. Despite priding ourselves on our tight, carefully considered scope, we found a lot of publishers would have actually preferred something more ambitious. In a way, they wanted to upsize their meal, which in turn was giving us a crisis of faith. Why would our game take this long and cost this much? Why wasn't it bigger and more complex and ticking more boxes? When you enter negotiations with someone where you're hoping they will give you money in return for a game you haven't finished making yet, it's a lot easier to convince them with promises of features and content than by guaranteeing depth and restraint. It will have a branching narrative and modding support is an easier sell than there will be exactly 8 levels, the player has to figure out there's a story for themselves, and we're not implementing a scoring system on purpose. And when you try to estimate how long something will take, you automatically pitch yourself on your best day, working at your maximum capacity, even though that's not remotely close to what you can hope to achieve. We thought our relatively high time and cost estimates were just being realistic and not overblown. But in the end, we were wrong. We had severely underestimated how much it would cost and how long it would take to make the supposedly tiny game. The difficulty we were encountered getting publishers to open their wallets had actually led us to consider a different strategy. A Soy Android Cactus had not been a big hit, but Witchbeam did have money in the bank. What if we took everything we had and financed development ourselves? That way, we could look for a publisher that would primarily help us with all the other parts of making and releasing an indie game that's so demanding. This gave us a lot more room to maneuver in these discussions, and we did end up signing with a publisher.
While Tim, Jeff, and I were core staff, we had more work to do than just the 3 of us could handle, so we readily employed contractors where we could. Angus was with us the longest, shout out to Angus, for 2.5 years, while others worked with us for shorter stints, from 7 months down to just a few weeks. Given that we were hiring folks for one game and not staffing up a studio, we weren't offering permanent roles, but we wanted our contractors to feel like they were genuinely part of the team. We included them in our stand-ups each morning. They were part of the everyday conversations in our Discord around the game, and we worked together closely. We knew we couldn't be their destination, so we wanted to make sure we could be a good stepping stone. Unpacking could be a high-profile project for their resume, an opportunity to learn new skills, and in some cases, an inroad to working with other indie teams. Our contractors played a vital role in making Unpacking possible, so we did our best to be useful to their ambitions too.
So at this stage, development was proceeding relatively smoothly, but as we approached alpha, our timeline started to slip away from us. We'd already moved our alpha date several times, and it seemed clear we were going to do so again. It was a really stressful point in the project, and we faced a common game development dilemma. Time versus dev power versus amount of content. But the thing was, our scope felt correct, and we'd already hired where we could. Bringing on more people didn't feel like it would be a fast or a stable solution. And so, in a moment of clarity, we recognized that time was our movable variable. We went back to our publisher and made the frankly terrifying declaration that our alpha was no longer defined by a date, but a destination. We would reach alpha once our game had all the features our alpha was meant to have. This had consequences. Like, yeah, like putting our budget and the runway it afforded into freefall, and meaning we no longer had a projected release date, which is generally something a publisher doesn't like to hear. But it protected the scope of our game and our team. We took the gamble that we would reach our milestone faster by focusing on quality than we would by focusing on speed. Now, I think the gamble paid off. With some of the stress lifted, our renewed focus actually helped us hit the alpha pretty swiftly. Better yet, by not compromising, we had this firm foundation for the future milestones, and we kept our schedule from then on.
But it wasn't enough to just make the game. The whole time we had to be hard at work marketing it, too. Back when our GIF went viral, it lit a flame, which we then had to protect for the rest of development, which was going to be another 3 years. We had been fortunate enough to receive this attention so early on, but now we had to keep this interest from being extinguished for the next 3 years until release. This flame and our ambition were intertwined. We needed an audience for our game to succeed, and knowing an audience was there helped keep us motivated and on track. We tried to maintain a steady heartbeat by regularly posting small glimpses of content, enough to keep folks intrigued, but leaving more major reveals for important marketing beats closer to release. We pursued every opportunity we could reach in order to magnify the organic interest the game was receiving. Physical shows at first, then online events when travel was no longer a thing. We'd also riff off trends and current events. For example, who remembers what March 2020 was like?
Yeah.
No, I'm just gonna leave this running for a bit.
Shitposting is a legitimate indie marketing strategy.
Oh yeah.
And then finally, the game came out.
Thank you. So, what had our ambitions achieved? The game sold over 100,000 copies in 10 days. We had glowing press reviews with a Metacritic score of 84 on PC and 86 on Switch. Unpacking got nominated for a whopping 50 awards and won 18 of them, including Australia's very own AGDAs, the DICE Awards, and this one at the Game Developers Choice Awards. Definitely my favorite award photo, by the way. Just look at the pathos on like Tim's face. So good.
But even though we'd focused all our energy on reaching this point, things didn't stop there. If you've only released games in larger studios, you might not realize that when an indie game ships, you're on the vanguard. We knew we wouldn't see any money for about 3 months, and even if everything went right, there'd be this ongoing support for a couple of months. But we didn't expect to be still supporting the game practically full-time a year later. Despite shipping a relatively bug-free build, having no DLC or further development planned, and hiring an amazing community manager to handle a bunch of work for us, we still had a lot to do. We fielded tech support requests and released a quality of life patch. We worked with a porting team to do the PlayStation releases, with limited run games to do a physical releases on 3 platforms, and with another partner to make some merch. For half a year, we spent more time traveling than we spent at home, giving talks around the world and attending award shows. We gave interviews on radio, television, podcasts, and in print. Every invite felt like one of those once-in-a-lifetime opportunities that we couldn't afford to miss. It was very exciting, but also very exhausting.
Which brings us to the dark side of ambition. We're both experiencing burnout. It's kind of insidious, really. We're not working anywhere near as hard as we did during development, but the work we are doing feels like it's taking just as much out of us, if not more. We haven't been able to stop. So many opportunities have presented themselves, and we know how fortunate we are to be in this position, but we also realize it's not sustainable. We have to be smarter about what we say yes to and let some opportunities pass us by, or that decision is going to start being made for us by our failing bodies. Independent development is very much a double-edged sword. We thrive in an environment where we have control over our project, where nobody above us has the power to cancel it or meddle with our vision for what we think it should be. But on the flip side, that means we're also directly responsible for that vision and take on the stress and risk of it all in a way that's surprisingly difficult to delegate away, even post-release.
But what comes next? Where does our ambition lead us? So, Witchbeam has now made 2 games, and I feel like I'm at a crossroad. I want to keep making games, and I want Witchbeam to be a vehicle that brings games into existence and works with others to empower and enable them too. Honestly, the expectation that a studio should try to rapidly grow after a success scares me a lot. I don't want to aggressively upsize or take external funding to chase something bigger than I can handle. I'm scared of what my creative ambitions colliding with someone else's financial expectations. I'm scared of my creative ambitions colliding with someone else's financial expectations and discovering which one would be the victor. I want to find a path forward that satisfies my creative, ethical, and commercial aspirations and attempt to thread that needle with care.
As for me, if I'm honest, I just want to take a break. I really need some recovery time. I don't even want to think beyond that at the moment. This project consumed my heart and soul, and it's going to take some time for me to get back my creative energy. That sounds a little dark, but here's the upshot. The last time I took a real break from work, I came up with Unpacking. Maybe a good long rest will bring about another good idea. I don't harbor ambitions to make something as successful as Unpacking again, or something bigger and better. I'm not ruling out the possibility of that ever happening. I just don't want that to be my goal. I've seen studios stall or even fail because they were trying too hard to make lightning strike twice. I just want to make things that I enjoy working on and that I can feel proud of. I think if I do, other people will like them too.
Unpacking is a game that began with modest ambitions, but grew into our biggest career highlight. In some ways, it was an extension of our personal ambition to pursue game development on our own terms.
Our industry is infamous for its high churn rate. Studios rise fast and fall even faster. Acquisitions are rampant and the rules keep changing. In an industry like this, maybe the boldest ambition is to be sustainable. We just want to still be here. Thank you.
A huge thank you to Wren and Tim. when we were discussing this, I got so stuck on the idea of sustainable ambition and what that means in our industry, because we do love to dream big, but by God, do we love to burn out too sometimes. Thank you again. This was the first of an amazing 3 days of content, but we are going to go pretty much directly into morning tea. So please feel free to exit and head right back upstairs to where you're checked in. And if you do want to speak with Tim and Wren afterwards, maybe let them get their refreshments and things like that first. So thank you, and I'll see you back here this afternoon.